because you're a delivery driver. It's humiliating." That's what my brother shouted in my face at his birthday party. Party I wasn't even invited to. I figured that even if I wasn't on the guest list, I should still show up and give him a gift, partly because I'm his brother, but also because I was still trying to make up for what happened all those years ago. In the end, though, all I got in return was rejection and humiliation. And then, just a few days later, I discovered the truth. It wasn't just that he was embarrassed by the fact that I drive a truck. He looked down on me. They called me a walking ATM. That incident from years ago, the one I've carried guilt over for over a decade, turned out to be a setup, a whole act made up by him. So now I'm telling my story, and I want to ask you, was I wrong for the choices I made? Hello, everyone. I'm Michael, 26 years old, working as a local delivery driver for a food company in Boise. Every day, I drive my small truck through the same familiar routes, from the central warehouse to local supermarkets, from convenience stores to the little sandwich shop on the corner, and then back to my quiet apartment at the end of the day. Life these days isn't loud, isn't stressful, and there's no one waiting for me at the door. Sometimes, that makes breathing easier. For the first 24 years of my life, Riverside was my whole world. I used to think of it as my roots, something unshakable. But then, when I got old enough to realize that not everything I once believed was love was, I felt suffocated in the house I grew up in. The disappointments didn't explode. They cut slowly and quietly, with coldness, favoritism, and expectations that never seemed to land where they should, even though I kept trying to stay connected and supporting them like it was some unspoken duty. All I got in return was avoidance and sometimes shame, the kind they tried to hide when my name came up. And then one day, I couldn't take it anymore. After something happened 2 years ago, I decided to say everything I'd been holding in. Not long after that, I moved to Boise and started over. 26 years ago, I was born in Riverside, California, a town not too big but warm enough to make you believe that family would always be the safest place. 4 years later, my younger brother, Grayson, was born, and we all welcomed him with joy. My parents, our relatives, and even me. When we were little, my parents never showed any difference between us. We had matching bikes and school backpacks that differed in color, and every time snacks were handed out, Mom always split them evenly. When Grayson cried, Dad held him. When I scraped my knee, Mom had me. Everything, at least in the soft focused memory of my younger self, was equally shared from love to expectations. But then, in the summer, I turned 16. Something happened quietly, but enough to shift everything. It was a weekend, and my brother and I were off school. Our family decided to go camping at a national forest about a 2-hour drive from home. Everything felt cheerful as we headed out. Mom packed the food. Dad double-checked the tent. And me? I only brought the one thing I was excited about for the trip, a brand new handheld game console I bought the day before. When we got there, my parents started setting up camp. Before getting to work, Mom looked at me, still holding a tent rope in her hand, and said, "Keep an eye on Grayson for a bit. Okay, don't let him get too close to the edge." I nodded obsessively, my eyes still locked on the glowing screen in my hands. Grayson was 12 then, a head shorter than me, but with the energy of a squirrel. He darted around, hopping near the slope's edge where a small stream flowed over moss-covered rocks. And me, I sat with my back against a tree, fully zoned into the final battle of my game. A few minutes later, I heard leaves rustling fast, then a scream from near the slope. The next second, I listened to my mom's voice, broken with panic. "Grayson, Grayson." I jerked my head up, and my game console slipped from my hands, hitting the ground. A chill shot through me as I saw my parents running toward a spot where Grayson was nowhere in sight. When I arrived, my brother was already at the bottom of the slope, covered in dirt, his arms scraped up, his face pale with fear. Thankfully, he hadn't broken any bones or suffered any serious injuries, just a few scrapes and a pretty big scare. But the price I paid was heavier than that. No one blamed me out loud after that day, but Dad's eyes turned colder. Mom's voice got softer. Like she feared that raising it might make me ignore Grayson again. They never said it was my fault, but every little thing they did made me believe. Maybe it was, and I didn't deny it. I knew I'd been caught up in my game. I knew I should have been watching him. I blamed myself and judged myself long before anyone else ever could. From that point on, the balance in our home quietly shifted. Grayson got more attention, more check minus sins, and more care. I was still their son, but slowly, I became the one who took care of himself. Got myself to school, cleaned up my room, and stayed out of trouble. The only way to make up for what happened when I was 16 was to step back from anything that felt like a priority. And I did step back. I chose to let Grayson have it all. I decided to do the right things, meet expectations, and ask for nothing. What I didn't expect was that I'd start to disappear in all that silence in their eyes. Like a shadow, quiet, easy to forget. And that tension in my family started to show when I turned 18. The year I made a decision my parents still haven't truly accepted. After over 20 years working at the local machine shop, my dad had just lost his job. My mom was barely holding things together with her cashier job at the grocery store. Modest pay, and she often had to pick up extra night shifts to cover the bills, insurance, medication, and all the little things that piled up. I still remember the nights she'd come home late, the back of her shirt damp with sweat after walking more than 20 minutes from the bus stop. My dad grew quieter, spending hours alone in the garage, not fixing anything, just sitting there. That year, I got accepted into a state university. They offered a decent financial aid package, and most of my tuition was covered. But even with part-minus time work, I'd still need to borrow at least $20,000 to cover living expenses, books, meals, and housing for years. I remember holding that acceptance letter and sitting alone in the park for hours. I repeatedly read those words, asking myself, do I even want to study this major? Will the next 4 years make me any happier? Or am I just chasing something because others think it's the right thing to do? And I found my answer. I didn't want to start my adult life buried in debt, especially while my family struggled to get by. I didn't want to enter a field I wasn't excited about. I didn't want to live someone else's version of success and wake up one day wondering if I'd ever really chosen anything for myself. So I didn't go to college. I chose work instead. I signed up for CDL training and landed a job with a local food delivery company. Every day, I drove a truck from the warehouse to convenience stores, small restaurants, and sometimes even schools. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody clapped when I finished a shift, but it gave me precisely what I needed at the time: steady income and independence. Once I had the job, I rented a small apartment on the city's south side, about 15 minutes from downtown. The rent was $730 a month. Not cheap for a starting wage, but just enough for me to have a space. A space without arguments echoing from down the hall or that cold silence that always followed whenever I said something my parents didn't want to hear. As for my parents, they weren't happy when they found out I'd turned down college. They tried to talk me into taking out loans, saying I was wasting an opportunity, that a college degree was the only real way out of the struggle we'd always known. My dad said, "Aren't you afraid people will look down on you?" My mom, though softer in her words, carried a look that always held a quiet kind of disappointment I could never erase. I understood they were worried, but I also understood myself. I needed an absolute path, a start that didn't sit on someone else's shoulders. I chose to work. I decided to stand on my own. I decided to be responsible for my life, even if that road was rough and lonely. From then on, the distance between me and my parents grew. There was no big blow-up, no dramatic fight, just quieter weekend dinners, fewer texts, and visits that felt more like a formality than a reunion. Sometimes, I wonder if things would have been different had I been born into a family with more means. Maybe I'd be sitting in a lecture hall somewhere, studying economics or engineering, instead of spending 8 hours a day behind the wheel, dropping off boxes at places where no one remembers the name of the guy making the delivery. But then I remind myself, this is my life, my choice. And even if the road's not smooth, at least it's one I chose for myself. At first, I thought my parents' reaction was just shock. I hoped that once the anger passed and things settled down, They'd see that my decision wasn't rebellion. It was simply the best choice I could make with the cards I'd been dealt. So even after moving out and starting work, I still set aside a small portion of my monthly paycheck to send home. It wasn't much, just a few $100s, but it was my way of showing that I still cared, felt connected, and carried a sense of duty to where I came from. Later on, when Grayson got into college, a pretty reputable one in the state, I was the one who paid his tuition. I never made a big deal out of it. I never asked for thanks. I did it because I wanted to, because I hoped that one day, my parents would look back and understand me a little better. I wasn't the failure they believed I was. I was walking a different path. Slower, quieter, but honest. But instead of growing closer, we drifted even further apart. All the care, hopes, and stories my mom used to share with me were redirected toward Grayson because he was in college, because he was the future. And me, in their eyes, I was just a truck driver. Nothing to be proud of. Still, I kept trying. I came home for Thanksgiving. I showed up every Christmas, usually with sandwiches from a shop I knew they liked. Once I even drove over 5 hours to make it in time for dinner. I did more than they ever knew. But all that effort, all hope, in the end, it couldn't cover up the truth. I had become a stranger in my own family. And then, 2 years ago, on Grayson's 20th birthday, they delivered a blow that hit deeper than any slap. Not with hands, not with words, but with an action so clear and cutting. I still remember every moment like it happened yesterday. That was the day I realized there was nothing left to hold on to. And that was the day I finally knew what I had to do. 2 years ago, 2 days before Grayson's birthday, I called my mom to ask if the family had any plans to celebrate this year. Her voice was as soft as always, but this time, there was a trace of hurry in the way she replied. No, honey. We're not doing anything this year. Trying to keep it simple. Your brother's busy with school, so we agreed not to celebrate. I didn't question it. I believed her. I even felt a little sorry, thinking maybe she just wanted to save money. Or maybe Grayson wasn't into birthday parties anymore at 20. Still, I decided to get him a small gift. Not to earn points or prove anything. Just because I still wanted to do something for him like I always had. During my lunch break, I swung by the bookstore near work 2 days later. I picked out a leather-bound journal and a signature pen. The kind I remembered Grayson mentioning once in passing. I wrapped the gift carefully, then drove to my parents' house. But a strange feeling crept in as I turned onto the familiar street. Parked out front were 4 or 5 cars lined bumper to bumper. A couple of colorful party hats had been blown off the fence. From inside, I heard music. Not loud, but enough to make me freeze. It was the sound of a party. I stood at the gate, clutching the gift wrapped in brown paper and a green ribbon. My heart slowed down, like something had reached inside and squeezed it tight. And I realized my mother had lied. She didn't want me there. Not because of money. Not because Grayson was busy. But because they didn't want me in the room. Didn't want me in the photos. They didn't want me to be an embarrassment. At that moment, I almost turned back. I nearly left the gift at the gate and walked away like I'd never come. But something in me wouldn't let me. I walked through the gate. The moment I stepped inside, the 3 saw me. No hesitation. No confusion. Just quick, practiced movement. My parents rushed across the lawn like they were afraid someone might notice the guest who wasn't supposed to be there. Grayson was right behind them. The 3 of them stopped me halfway down the path. Without a word, my dad placed his hand on my shoulder, turned me away from the guests, and gently pushed me toward the side of the house. And that's where it happened. For the first time in my life, I heard the raw, unfiltered truth from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And it chilled me to the bone. The moment they pulled me to the side of the house, all 3 of their faces changed. My mom spoke first, her voice low and rushed, like she was trying hard to stay composed. You shouldn't have come here, Michael. Before I could even react, my dad cut in blunt. Firm, this party isn't for you. It's Grayson's day, and you should go. Just seconds after those words left his mouth, I felt a tightness rise in my chest, like the air was slowly drained. I asked, trying my best to keep my voice steady, why I'm his brother. That's when Grayson stepped forward. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. He said it straight. Because you're a delivery driver. It isn't very comfortable. I don't want my friends to know what you do. Okay, I froze. But he wasn't done. He went on like he'd been holding this in 4 years. What would my friends say if they discovered my brother drives a truck in a reflective vest? They'd laugh in my face. Right after that, my mom took a step closer. Her eyes were heavy. Her voice calm, but full of pressure. Michael, now is not the time to make a scene. If you care about your brother, then don't stay. Let him have his day. And then my dad sealed it. His tone cold and final. Like this wasn't family anymore. Just a meeting he needed to wrap up. You need to leave. Now, and if you can't respect that, then maybe you shouldn't return at all. I stood there, every word hitting like a stone to the chest. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't ask for more. I just turned around and walked away from that house. With the quiet, solid decision that I would never set foot in it again. That afternoon, after leaving my parents' house, I couldn't keep my focus behind the wheel. Not even for a few minutes. I called my team lead and asked them to take the rest of the shift off. Luckily, someone was waiting to pick up extra hours, so my route got reassigned quickly. I clocked out and drove back to my apartment, the same place I've lived alone since I first left home. I did everything I could to stay visible in their eyes for 6 years. As soon as I had steady work, I started sending home $200 monthly. Back then, my mom was still working, still healthy enough to manage. But 2 years later, her health began to fade. She couldn't stand for long without getting short of breath, and working evening shifts at the grocery store was no longer an option. So I quietly increased the amount to $500 monthly, even though nobody asked me to. By now, I've sent them close to $30,000. Every cent turned from the time I gave up from long hours and extra shifts. And still, they turned their backs on me. I remember it clearly. The day my mom brought Grayson to my place. She clutched her purse tightly, her voice trembling just a bit when she said, "Grayson got into college, but things are tight right now. Can you help with his tuition?" I hesitated. I was honest. Mommy can take out a student loan. He can borrow it now and pay it back after he graduates. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, then said something I'll never forget. If it weren't for that accident, maybe he'd be strong enough to get a job and pay his way. Something gripped my heart and squeezed me the moment she said it. One sentence was all it took for everything to come rushing back. And so, I nodded. From that day on, I paid $2,000 a semester for Grayson. I did that for 4 semesters, a total of $8,000. And Grayson, he took the money without hesitation. I never asked if I could afford it. I never said thank you. And now, years later, when I walked through that gate, before I could even say happy birthday, the 3 of them pulled me aside like I was something shameful they needed to hide. They looked at me like a stranger, like my job was a stain on this family's name. So I sat there in my apartment with the lights off, listening to the cars pass outside. And I asked myself, all these years, what have I been living for? As I sat on the couch, the apartment dimmed in the fading light of the day. My phone buzzed beside me. The screen lit up with a name. David. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering, still not fully settled after everything that had happened. I lifted the phone to my ear, my voice dry and worn, like I'd just gone an entire day without water. What is it? On the other end, David paused for a beat, then spoke, his voice low but steady. Are you still on shift? I glanced at the clock on the empty wall in front of me, then answered, my tone flat. No, I'm home. Been back for a little while. There was another pause. Then David continued, slower this time. I'm near Main Street. There's a coffee shop on the corner of 12th. If you're free, I want to meet up for a bit. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. At that moment I figured, maybe I could use some fresh air too. 30 minutes later, I arrived. A small coffee shop with soft yellow lighting, just warm enough to ease the weight in your chest a little. David was already inside, sitting at a table near the window. When I pulled the chair out and sat across from him, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine for only a second, before dropping quietly to the table. For a moment, the only sound between us was the soft clink of a spoon tapping the side of a cup. Then David spoke, low but direct. I came because, when I saw you walking away from the house earlier, I couldn't take it anymore. I came because there's something I think you should know about Grayson. I didn't answer. I looked at him silently, waiting for whatever he said. A few seconds passed. David swallowed hard, his voice dropping further as he went on. Grayson used to call you a walking ATM in front of his friends. One of the guys in that group told me. At that moment, something inside my chest went cold. Not out of shock, but from quiet confirmation. Like I'd always known. Deep down, I just never had anyone brave enough to say it out loud. But David wasn't finished. What he said next hit even harder, deeper than I'd expected. He continued, and that camping trip, the one when you were 16, I heard from someone close to him. He did it on purpose. He hurt himself on purpose. They rode down the hill to get attention. Because back then, your parents were busy setting up the tent, and you were lost in your game. No one was paying attention to him, so he staged it to see if anyone would come running. I can't remember how I reacted right in that moment. I remember something inside me cracking. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet like metal splitting under pressure. After holding on too long, I stayed silent for a long while after David finished. And then, once the thoughts had settled and I could see clearly, I finally spoke, steady and calm. Can you help me get proof? A video or recording, anything as long as he says it himself. Not because I don't believe you, but because I need something real. Something that lets me finally break free from them. As soon as the words left my mouth, David stared at me for a few extra seconds, maybe to see if I was serious. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. All right, I'll find a way to get it for you. And in that short, quiet moment, for the first time in years, I finally knew exactly what I had to do to protect myself. David worked faster than I expected. 2 days later, while I was sitting alone in my small kitchen, at 6 in the morning, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, my phone lit up with his message. An audio file, 8 minutes and 3 seconds long. I didn't hesitate. I tapped to play. The first thing I heard was the unmistakable hum of a bar. Vague conversations in the background. Chairs scraping across tiled floors. Glasses clinking lightly together. Then came David's voice. Steady, casual, carefully natural. Hey, that camping trip when you were 12. Your brother still thinks it was his fault. There was a brief silence. Then Grayson's voice came through. Slightly slurred, loose around the edges. Like someone halfway into a buzz. He still lives with that guilt. Good makes him easier to control. David didn't respond. He let the silence hang. Then Grayson went on. Like someone enjoying the retelling of an old prank he knew he'd gotten away with. I rolled down on purpose. Bro, I straight up threw myself. It hurt like hell, but it was worth it. I just wanted to see if anyone gave a damn. Mom and Dad freaked, and my brother's been carrying that guilt ever since. Grayson laughed then. Not loud, but sharp. A smug laugh. Like someone reliving a private joke. They always knew they'd won. After the sound of him sipping a drink, his tone dipped a bit. Darker but still dripping with pride. Everything changed after that. Mom and Dad always took my side. And my brother. Man, he acts like he owes me something. He always gives in and always says yes. Mom brings up the past if he hesitates. And boom, he folds. I paused the recording there. Not because it ended, but because I didn't need to hear another second. Every word hit slow and clean. Undeniable. The years I spent blaming myself. The guilt I carried like a stone on my back. Was all built on a performance. I manipulative, calculated act by a scared, bitter kid. One that grew sharper with time. And I, the stupid older brother, had spent my whole life living like I owed someone a debt I never actually owed. With the proof in my hands, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. Everything was clear now. And if I kept enduring it as I had for the past 6 years, then maybe I was the one disrespecting myself. So I opened my banking app, scrolled to the recurring payment section, and canceled the $500 monthly support I'd been sending to my parents. Right after, I opened my messages and typed out a text to my mom. Now I won't send the $500 a month anymore. Just letting you know in advance so you can plan accordingly. Then I searched for Grayson's name in my contacts and sent him a message. This one was even shorter. Starting next semester. You're on your own for tuition. I'm done. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then hit send. Immediately after, I blocked their numbers. Mom's, dad's, and Grayson's. Not because I was afraid of what they might say, but because at that moment I didn't want to hear it anymore. I needed space to breathe, think, and stand up fully as my person. Not bow down under the weight of guilt that was never mine to carry. Before I got up from the table, I quickly jotted something down on my 2-2 list. Find a new place to live, because I knew sooner or later they'd come looking for me. And when they did, I didn't want them to find me, only to throw the word family around like a rope, hoping to pull me back in. 3 days later, just like I'd expected, they showed up. It was a weekday afternoon. When the doorbell rang, I just finished showering and hadn't even made my coffee yet. I opened the door and there they were. Grayson stood front and center, arms crossed, face blank. Beside him were my parents, their expressions tight with the weight of restrained frustration. My dad spoke first, voice sharp, clipped, loaded with judgment. It was just a small party. Michael, did you have to blow it out of proportion? Even a kid wouldn't act like this. Right after that, my mom stepped in, trying to keep her tone soft. But her words couldn't hide the blame. We're family. Sometimes things don't go how we like, but we sit down and talk it through. You, though, act like you want to cut us off completely over one night. Then came Grayson. He didn't even bother pretending to care. Arms still folded, eyes locked on me. As he said, "You overreacted. It wasn't even that serious. You're acting like you got betrayed or something." I stood there in silence. I let them speak because I needed to be sure, even after everything that had happened. They all worried that I had overreacted. After a few seconds of silence, I turned to Grayson. My voice was low, just enough for him to hear. "I know everything. Grayson, I have proof. But if you don't want mom and dad to find out, you'd better keep your mouth shut." Grayson blinked, just once, and his expression shifted instantly. The arrogance faded. What replaced it wasn't guilt but caution. Silence. Then I looked at my parents. My voice was steady and calm, but every word was clear. "I think this is where today ends. Everyone has their part in this story. Mine is done." With that, I closed the door. They were still standing there when it shut, probably stunned by how I spoke and looked at them. Not like a son trying to explain himself, but like a man who finally stopped needing to. I didn't want to fight. I didn't need one, because at this point, they were no different from strangers to me, and I wasn't going to waste another word on strangers. That night, after they left, while I was still eating dinner in the quiet of my kitchen, my phone buzzed. David was calling. I picked up and didn't say a word, just waited. His voice came through immediately, fast, heavy. "Did you see it? Grayson just posted on Read It. And Facebook too." I paused and set my fork down on the table. I still said nothing. David kept going, tension straining every word. "He's saying you betrayed the family. You abandoned your aging parents and left them with no income. You walked out on your little brother in the middle of college." I closed my eyes for a moment. That old feeling, like a familiar wound splitting back open, pressed into my chest. But David wasn't done. He even brought up the camping trip. "They said you were the one who pushed him down the slope. He said he's not healthy enough now to study and work. And now, with you cutting him off, you're turning your back when he needs you the most." When he finished, I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the street tilted cast with golden streaks across the dark. Blurry, distant. In my head, every word David had just spoken began to rewind. Slow motion, sharp and deliberate. Not because I was shocked, but because I couldn't believe he'd go that far. Because the part that hurt more than the lies, I knew he knew I'd see it. He knew I'd read it. And he still wrote it anyway. And what surprised me most that night wasn't the betrayal from my family, wasn't the drama that felt tripped from some scripted show. I never thought I'd live through. It was David. His words simple, firm and so genuinely real, that they stopped me cold for a few seconds, before I could even respond. After a pause, his voice came through the line again, calm but with an edge of resolve. That left no room for doubt. Your job now is to bring that recording home. Sit down with your parents. Tell them everything. As for the internet part, I'll take care of it. I didn't say much. Just one word. The only one that mattered right then. Thanks. And then I hung up. Right after that, I grabbed the keys and rushed to the car. Under the dim streetlight, the tires rolled smoothly through the familiar curbs. Once the way home, now just where I used to belong. After 3 rings, my mother opened the gate. She didn't look at me. I didn't ask why I was there. She turned around and padded back inside. Maybe she was still angry. Perhaps she still thought I was the reckless son who ruined everything. I stepped inside and headed straight to the living room to find Dad. He was sitting there watching TV. Grayson sprawled out on the chair, phone angling loosely in his hand. The moment he saw me, he leaned back, smirked and said in that voice, like he'd been waiting for this all night, "Changed your mind? Huh, I knew you would. Sooner or later, you had to come back." At that moment, my hand clenched into a fist. I was ready to hit him. But I took a deep breath, tightened the strap of my bag, and forced myself to stay grounded. I pointed straight at his face, my voice flaring like fire. "Shut your damn mouth before I give you what you've been asking for. Right here." Grayson froze. He didn't say a word for the first time in his life. No snark, no comeback. He just looked at me and I knew I wouldn't hold back if he said one more thing. Then I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket and opened the recording. I turned the volume up and let the sound fill that room full of memories. The whole house felt colder as Grayson's voice came through. He went pale just a few seconds in, and then, like he realized something had gone too far to fix, he shot up and panicked. "Michael, turn it off. Please. I'm sorry. I messed up." But it was too late. The recording kept playing. Clear. Steady. Not missing a single word. When it got to the part where he said, I threw myself down on purpose, just to see if anyone gave a damn. I glanced at my mom. She raised her hands to her face, then broke down. Deep choking sobs that rattled with every breath. My dad said nothing. He just let out a long sigh, like something had slipped through his fingers, and he wasn't sure he'd ever had a grip on it in the first place. I just stood there, silent, not because I was enjoying being proven right, but because I knew. From then on, no one in this house could say they didn't know. No one could look the other way. No one could make me stay quiet anymore. A few minutes later, everything quieted down. No one said a word. The only sounds were heavy breathing and the TV playing in the background, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, taking in the familiar room, the floor where I used to watch cartoons, the table where we once had family dinners, now just a shell of something that had already fallen apart. I knew I shouldn't stay much longer. Before turning to leave, I looked straight at Grayson, my voice calm, so calm it surprised even me. Tonight, you need to go public and set the record straight. If you don't, I'll sue you for defamation. I won't let your lies ruin my career. Grayson didn't respond. He lowered his head in silence. Right then, my mom spoke up. For the first time since the recording ended, her voice cracked. I'm sorry, Michael. All this time, your father and I, we've been unfair. We didn't see you. We didn't understand you. Before I could reply, she stepped closer and took my hand, her voice pleading. Please don't go. Say this is still your home. I looked at her, then at my father, still slumped at the edge of the couch, head in his hands, eyes empty like he'd lost something he couldn't ever get back. I spoke slowly, not raising my voice, not blaming anyone, just the truth. I'm not angry at you, not anymore, but going back to how things were. I can't do that. I've tried for years. Now I want to live a life where I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I gently pulled my hand from hers. and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. My mom stood there crying behind me. And Dad, he didn't say a word. He just sat there in silence, face still buried in his hands, just as I gasped. Grayson posted a public statement that night. It was short, titled, "I was wrong." He admitted that everything in his previous post was a lie, that I never abandoned the family, that I had nothing to do with the accident years ago, and that for all these years, I was the only one quietly holding everything together, without a single complaint, and with the recording David had shared online. Just a few hours earlier, public opinion flipped fast. People who once sympathized with Grayson, who had been outraged by the story of a forgotten little brother, now turned on him hard. I read David's post. I read Grayson's apology. Hundreds of comments flooded in under each. "You don't deserve a brother like that. Faking an injury to manipulate your whole family. You need help. If I were your brother, I'd have walked out of your life long ago." Each line was a knife, but not for me. A few days later, David messaged me. He said Grayson was isolated entirely at school. His girlfriend had broken up with him. His friends were keeping their distance. Professors had gone cold. He received an official disciplinary notice from the school administration for causing serious harm to the university's reputation. But they still let him stay and enroll. Maybe because he was still young. Perhaps because they believed this kind of fall was enough to wake him up. I didn't feel satisfied. Honestly, I didn't feel good about any of it. All I felt was sadness. Not because Grayson was facing the consequences, but because of everything that led him to this point. How he'd been coddled. My silence. Our parents' blindness. How kindness was mistaken for weakness. How family love turned into a quiet debt. And in the end, the wrong choice. One that he and only he made. I was sad, but I didn't regret anything. Because getting to this point, that was Grayson's choice. A month after everything happened, I submitted a request to transfer branches. And luckily, there was precisely one open position left in the entire company. Boise, Idaho, a place I had once considered as a fresh start, though I never imagined it would come this soon. I got a response in 3 days. A week later, I left Riverside, the city I had called home for nearly my entire life. Boise isn't flashy, but it's quiet, breathable, and far enough that no one can accidentally step into the new life I'm building. I found a small apartment near work and started over, this time with no more burdens, no more guilt, and no more hope for things that were already too far gone to fix. It's been 2 years now. I'm no longer in touch with my family. No calls, no messages, no holidays that make me stop and wonder if I should go back. The only connection left is David. He visited last month and brought a box of cookies, a few old stories, and a little awkwardness, knowing I wasn't eager to hear much about the family. But still, I asked, not because I deeply cared anymore, but because sometimes just knowing they're doing okay is enough to make your heart feel a little lighter. David said my parents are doing fine. As for Grayson, he's different now. After that significant fall, it seems like he changed. He started working part-minus time, began covering part of his tuition, kept up with school, and now he's close to graduating. When I heard that, I didn't smile, but I nodded, not with joy or sadness, just a passing sense of peace, like taking off a damp coat after a prolonged cold rain. David also told me that my parents and Grayson had been trying to find out where I was over the past 2 years, at least 5 times. They asked David if he knew where I'd gone, what I was doing, and if I was okay. But David, just as I'd asked him to, always answered, "I don't know." And I know he kept that promise, not out of fear of my parents, but out of respect for my choice, the silence I had fought so hard to earn. After everything I've been through, there's one thing I want to say to anyone out there going through something like I did. Not everyone you treat well will know how to value it. And when the truth finally speaks, you no longer need to scream. You don't have to lose yourself to hold a place in someone else's heart. You don't have to carry guilt for things you didn't cause. And, most of all, You don't have to stay silent to keep up appearances. I don't regret being kind, but I do regret letting guilt hold me back for so long. If you're living with that same weight, that feeling of always having to carry the load, stay quiet. Be the one who understands. Remember this. Forgiveness is your choice. But freedom, that's your right. Don't wait until the pain breaks you to walk away. Leave while you're still whole. And keep living without needing anyone's permission or anyone's approval. And before I close this story, I want to ask you, those of you who stayed with me to the end, was I wrong for choosing to walk away from a family I once fought to hold on to? Was I wrong for making my brother face the truth instead of staying silent and letting everything fade in the dark? Was I wrong for choosing peace for myself, even if it meant stepping away from the people who once meant everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below this story. And if you saw even a piece of yourself in any part of this journey, don't forget to hit subscribe, like and share, so that others who are carrying the same weight can feel heard, feel seen, and know this, they are not alone. Thank you for listening. See you in the following story.